everyone, I'm Fadini. I'm the talent lead at Mountain Warehouse. I've been there for about 7 years, and I look after everything around the systemic change that we're trying to bring into effect when it comes to our talent, both internally as well as external identification of skills and talent for our business to sort of thrive and grow. Yeah, I've been in my current role for about 2.5, 3 years, and I've had great progression opportunities at Mountain Warehouse.
Thank you for leading. Jo.
Hi, my name's Jo Smith. So I am 6 weeks into working with Talent Mapper as the Chief People Officer. Prior to that, I think I did say on my table I've got over 30 years experience in generalist HR and also specialist roles. Some of the companies I've worked for include Stagecoach PLC, obviously Transport, which has just over 24,000 employees. I've also been lucky enough to work for BAA and Ford Motor Company. So I think hopefully people will see there that I love trains and I've also worked at some other companies as well, being regulated markets.
Great. Thank you very much, guys, for the introductions. Let's get into it. So we're going to talk initially about the role of data in workforce planning. You touched upon it earlier, Martin. We hear a lot about the importance of it in HR, but many organisations struggle to use it effectively. From your experience, Martin, at Talent Mapper, how can businesses leverage data for workforce planning?
I think the key thing is as I kind of started to allude to earlier, is start simple. Like don't overcomplicate this. The art of talent management is simplicity. It's super easy to make it complicated, but keeping it accessible to people in real basic layman terms that they understand outside of HR is one of the best ways to kind of get traction and support with this. So it's finding the pain point that your organisation is experiencing right now, because there will be something keeping the HRD or the board awake at night, and it will either be something like employee turnover, so we know through speaks like retail and hospitality people, the severe like hoppy turnover that they have around that. Then you've got organisations like FMCG and consulting. Sometimes it's the opposite way around, where they don't get enough churn and they're not getting enough new talent in. But it's finding what that pain point is and then being able to capture the key metrics around that and report back on it regularly. But tie it back into the financials. So a bit like we talked about earlier, it's quite easy to be able to manually calculate what the cost of attrition is within a business. And when you present that number to the CFO, usually you see the thumb of drones on their face. And that becomes a good compelling pain point to start to get traction.
Thank you, Martin. Fadini, in your role at Mountain Warehouse, how have you seen data influence talent strategy, in particular ED&I?
Yeah, I think it's just directly correlated, really. Without data, it's really difficult to be able to track what you're doing around diversity and inclusion. So we're using data at the moment to be able to understand our current state of play, track our progress towards where we want to get to identify our talent, and also to enable us to make equitable decisions around around lots of different aspects of the business. The fear of not using that, and in transparency where we were, not in the too far past, was that we were making a lot of decisions based on our own personal relationships with people, which just brings in that unconscious bias that we're absolutely trying to avoid. We're now able to thrive off and feel comfortable with the decisions that we're making based on the data. And I think it's just helped us and enabled us and put us on the right path to becoming a more inclusive workspace. So really key.
Great, thank you. Has anyone got any questions on how to gather or utilise data for these guys?
Yeah.
How do you ensure your staff self-identifies as correctly?
It's tricky because we try not to have them self-identify in terms of skill. I think tech's really helpful when it comes to the skill and mapping that to potentially what we're looking for in the opportunities that we might have. But when it comes to D&I data, that is so personal. So we want to completely understand how they identify, so for us to realise, okay, there's maybe opportunities to do things differently here, and also there's gaps. So we don't want to feel like we have groups of people without any representation.
It's a really good question. We had some real issues with that at Stagecoach. So we actually realised the more transparent you were, and also talking to the trade unions, because they had a real negative against anything to do with employee data and you know, almost trying to force your employees to do it. So we were just transparent. We tried to really talk to them about what we wanted to get from that data. And I think that's the key to most things when you're trying to move forward in this area. But definitely, you know, for those of you that work with trade unions, you know, you have to have that dialogue. And the more open you are, I think, the better it was, the easier it becomes. But it's a hard one to do.
You just well off, because there's a trust issue between employee and employer. As in, if, for example, they're a wheelchair user or they're gender neutral, do you think they feel they've been discriminated if they tell the truth?
I think personally that depends on the culture of the company and where that culture is at, and it's a journey, because you need to build it, and I think that certainly is one aspect that if you say you're going to do something, I think you absolutely need to follow through.
I completely agree with that. I think it's creating an environment of trust, and making your colleagues feel like transparency is the best way forward, both for them and for us. But it's tricky. It's definitely not an overnight solution. Yeah.
You've had really good success with that, though, haven't you? In terms of, I remember from our initial conversations before you started tracking it, to the uptake of the people that disclosed. I think it's fair to say the organisation was surprised by the response, right?
We were really pleased, really pleased. And it's meant that actually now we have, because the fear is that you don't want to have very limited data from certain areas, because actually, well, it's not anonymous that way, and it's tricky to use. So we actually didn't really have that problem, and we had really good pockets of data across the whole business. And I think we just kept that dialogue really open for a really long time with people about why we're doing it. And why it's important to us, and slowly shift the culture in that direction.
Oh yeah.
Just to follow on from that, did you have to mandate your business leaders to, I guess, encourage that level of transparency? Because it's all well and good saying, yes, you know, we're trusted environment, blah, 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 for your folks on the ground. But actually, you also need to know that you're not going on a hole. But welcoming first discussion, and that I would say is got to be harder than these organic uptake.
It is harder. It's much easier when the change comes from the top. Absolutely. And we've been fortunate, because when it comes to D&I, it has come from the top for us, which is great. Not everything. So there's been things that we've had to champion through the people team to get our board and our leaders to sort of engage with it and understand why we're doing it. And there's been moments where we brought Martin in to help us with that, and I think something that really speaks to them is the commercials and the ROI and the data. So we've tried to leverage that with them.
And does that apply with the middle tier? Because that's the sandwich.
Yeah.
Like, in the top is often easy because they get to see the commercials, they are the decision makers and the policies, and you'll see that to the ground or keys it is the middle tier and the hardest.
So I think you did a really good job with that, because they, so Mountain Warehouse particularly, they targeted the middle layer as well, so like their area regional type managers, for example, and their equivalents. There was quite a bit of work that was done around, not an extensive amount, but like a couple of hours of investment there to educate those teams of the benefits of it up front before that went out.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the big contributing factors to the success you had with it.
I think it was the first group of people that we engaged with, because we identified that that's probably going to be the trickiest ones to bring on side. Once they saw the benefit and once they were engaged with it, then we continued the rollout from there. But it was partly sort of informative and why, and partly educational, and I think that combination worked really well for us.
Yeah. We did not exactly the same, and they weren't on such a sort of progressive journey, but certainly in Stagecoach, we did a whole leadership conference And it was that awareness, education piece as well. So I don't know if the ladies know, so that's definitely an area where you need to do focus in the middle layer.
Great, thank you very much. Moving on to balancing internal development versus external hiring. One of the biggest challenges orgs face is whether to invest in developing internal talent or look at external. Joe, from your extensive experience in planes, trains and automobiles,
It's going to follow me around now, isn't it? I'm going to wish this
Tagline.
how should organisations strike this balance?
Okay, well, certainly for me, I think COVID actually meant that we were far more after COVID. So we were far on the back foot. It meant that some of the brilliant things that we had been doing had almost sort of lapsed, and we were now having to sort of kick-start it again. So COVID really, I don't think helped, and I think it's fair to say didn't help a lot of businesses. So the absolute key is to have a long-term vision, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room have actually been around where you've got that external person that has actually suddenly decided to lead the business, and you are desperately trying to see if you have successes there. And unfortunately, certainly in my experience, we don't necessarily have that person there ready time. So, I think we've all been there where the line manager wants that quick fix, and it's like, let's bring in an external hire. Let's be honest, a lot of the time it's not quick. They have notice periods, and it certainly costs a lot of money. So, in an ideal world, you do actually need to start planning for these kind of things. And for internal development, for me, there's no one answer. And I think it's very much a blended approach. I totally focus on the career development plans for people, for individuals. Also, I think mentoring is great, where you can get that mentoring piece and you can get that assignment, the alignment to choose your own mentor. I've actually seen it where, senior people have chosen mentors for people. That doesn't work, is my experience in these matters. So really, for me, I think there are some benefits to external hires, maybe for specialist skills that you can't develop internally. They have a new approach to things. They can think about things in a different way. But I think we really need to be putting in those internal processes to get development and internal hires and internal mobility throughout an organisation.
Great, thanks, Joe. Question?
I'm an advocate for internal mobility, but how would you push back that leadership that says moving people around internally is just relaying the deck chairs on the Titanic, will that actually bring any board kids to the organisation?
Well, you will get that. I mean, there are two things to me, Kia, in that, we had this discussion on our table. If you don't promote internal development, people will leave, and then you will find, certainly as in our table, what tends to happen is those people can sometimes then come back in a couple of years. And that really affects engagement, because somebody's seeing somebody. Sorry,
No.
Because somebody would come back and then be like, oh well, obviously the way forward here is to exit the business, get the development or the experience, externally, then come back in again. So it usually is detrimental. How I have always tried to focus on this is, if you have proper internal plans of mobility. And Les, I used to spend a lot of time with finance, who used to not, really hold on to those people. You would say, okay, you're not losing this guy. He's going to be moved somewhere else in the business. You are still going to be getting quality people coming to fill the position. And I think you only get that when you've got a proper talent pipeline.
So the argument I've had pushback on is, if we've got all the people, you've done returning externals, I paid them staff, but we've got exactly the same people doing exactly the same output as a collective. How do we square that circle?
So I think the important thing is this is not a zero-sum game. It's about you need both. You will always need fresh talent in the business. We're never going to get away from that because it does bring in a fresh perspective, fresh pair of eyes, innovation. We're going to need an element of that. What we see, and you'll all know your organisations probably better than we do, but as an aggregate of what I've seen across industry is the bias tends to be higher on external versus internal hiring, and what you need is a balance of both, because we need to move people up and within to retain the talent and then backfill in other areas with external talent. So a classic example of where we've seen that in some of the businesses, we've been able to fill kind of more specialist or more niche roles internally, which often when you're starting to do things through agency, for example, come at a higher percentage. We've all been there, paying like some quite hefty recruiter fees at time. Whereas if you're recruiting for a more junior or kind of more standardized role, I guess, with more transferable skills, it's easier to attract. You can often do that direct without the use of agency support. And so that's where you start to see savings. But you're still getting the best of both. You're getting a blend of your internal people growing and also an injection of fresh talent as well.
Sorry, can I just also, I really find, I mean, I work for a 1,000-person company. Some of the insights we get from internal versus external part of Vanuge can actually bring even more innovation and inspiration than we'd have got externally, because when you're in a big company like that, you've got ideas. It's about, I think you do get an awful lot for that room as well.
I mean, the other thing is, even bringing an external person in, when you've gone through that whole process, you still have cultural fit, and you still have, are they actually, you're bringing them in, are they actually going to fit? And, sometimes the promises that you make at them to do, aren't necessarily followed through as well. So, my view, absolutely, it's getting that balance and choosing really carefully, isn't it, the roles that you choose to do externally.
Just final bit on that, I think, just to kind of round off, I think the one learn I've had with boards particularly is the more you can present things as an and rather than an or, you're more often likely to get backing for it. So if you can make them feel safe psychologically, if we're not taking things away from you, we're not saying you can't have X, we're saying you'll get to keep X and you'll also get Y, the adoption tends to be better, I think, in the messaging, if that helps. I know it's subtle, but yeah.
So it's definitely about balance. Are there any key factors that organisations need to consider, Martin, when looking at developing internally as well as external hiring?
I think it comes back to Joe's point now. Like, we're in an age of pretty cool tech now where we can start to create really nice personalised experiences for people. So being able to lay out in a way that we couldn't before, like these are all the different options available to you for your career. And then when we do that, being able to signpost them to the right specific development to help close that gap. So we can help get them the right support. So as Joe said, mentoring is a great example of that, connecting them with others through the business, getting them involved in projects or assignments that are more cross-functional, so you can leverage the insights and knowledge of getting people to share what goes on in the wider organisation and building their brand. And then also getting access to the right kind of support or development, particularly around those development plans, tends to be one of the biggest vehicles for success that we've seen, but always keen to learn if other people are doing anything cool around that. Because every day's a learning.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, Martin, you touched upon earlier that we have an average of 13 different roles within our career. So retention is obviously a big concern for businesses today. Ferdini, from a talent and DE&I perspective, what strategies have you seen work well in retaining top talent?
This has been a big conversation for us at Man Firehouse, actually, and we have seen a change and a move towards less attrition, which is really exciting. Something that as a business we've always been really proud of is championing internal mobility and career development. But what we were maybe missing is the aspects of engagement and inclusion, which I think are really, really crucial to creating a great place to work, which then, results in retention. So people want to feel valued. We found people want to feel like they have a sense of belonging, and they just want to see really clear career pathways towards leadership in a really equitable way. So for us, it starts right at the beginning when we're hiring externally. from the recruitment journey. We want to understand people's values, understand what makes them tick, really what drives them, and then keep that conversation active throughout their journey with us. So engage with our hiring managers to have the conversations once the recruitment process is over. And then for the internal side of things, we want to make sure that we're hearing feedback from our people all the time. So whether it's through surveys or stay interviews or anything like that, it's just that back and forth transparency and feedback, which we then hopefully have brought into the different people practices that we've been creating, and then essentially focus on inclusive career progression and equitable metrics.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Joe, you've worked in multiple automotive sectors. Any best practices in retention that you could share across multiple sectors?
I'd highlight two for me. Yeah, personalisation. So I think where people really feel that you've personalised it, you've made it tailored. I didn't realise you were going to talk about that. You mentioned it beautifully, so thank you. Because I think at that kind of level, people don't want to feel as if they're just being put on a leadership program. They want to understand how it's actually going to fit in with their career and their plans. So the personalisation and absolute transparency. So on our table, we were talking about, filling in information for HR, for, performance reviews, the good old time box, which Martin is a total advocate on it. And the problem here is, a lot of people do this work, and then it's like it just goes into an ether, but that just can't happen because they don't know where they're at, and when that happens is when you just get saying, hey, I can't see a future for myself here, and I'm going to go.
Great, thank you very much. Anyone got a question on retention at all? Please. Okay. Oh.
A few of us on this table, quite interestingly, was what varying sizes of companies from like 50 to thousands, hundreds of thousands. And what top tips have you got for us within kind of people and talent that don't have a workforce planning strategy, that haven't ever had one, to begin that journey? Yeah, because that's where a lot of us are at the moment.
Yeah, it's a great question. And interestingly, so, our clients range from, we've got, the smallest is 10 people, and the largest like 40,000. So it's a real range of people. What's interesting is a lot of the problems, regardless of size, are fairly consistent, but the way that you tackle it is the bit that's slightly nuanced, I would say. So if I think about like the SME route, they're either starting to grow out from like, these 10, 20, 30 people organisations, and that is they're often very resource poor at that point. They probably won't have dedicated HR resource, or if they do, it's very limited. It's one person trying to put out many fires. That's my student college. And so it does become a bit of a side of desk thing sometimes. So starting just keep it really, really simple and saying, okay, so where are we trying to get to over the next few years? What does the business strategy say we're trying to do? And using that as your starting point to then go, okay, well, if we are doubling headcount, for example, we're clearly going to have to bring talent in because, the math is in there to bring from within. But how do we still move people up and then backfill underneath them? That can be at its basic level. When you start to get into your 10, 20, 30,000 organisation type sizes, the problem's still the same in that you're still trying to marry that gap around, what does good look like and what do we need to fill, but you're doing it on a larger scale where you're more reliant on intel and data than your own personal knowledge at that point, because you can't possibly know all of those people. But the methodology is still the same, I would say, and starting with the big fundamental questions like what does success look like? What are we trying to do? And do we have what we need to marry that or not?
Thank you. Anyone got any other questions for the panel?
On the same topic, market conditions into that equation. When a market collapses and your strategy is here, and the market moves in that strategy, what's your advice there?
It's a really good question, and that particularly is where the data is super important, because if you're a business that's trying to pivot or change quickly, you need that type of information. So a great example of that would be, so I did a prototype of what we've now got with Talent Lab, albeit a very rudimentary element to it. in the Body Shop when we went through COVID. And that business had, as I said, 40,000 people. 90% of the workforce were in stores, in retail stores, and overnight every store across the planet had to close. And we would then have to face really difficult decisions of, do we lay people off? Do we furlough? How do we make revenue? And because we'd already got a database in place, albeit a more rudimentary version of what we've got now, within a week we redeployed globally people from stores to an at-home like Avon selling model. We were able to retain the jobs, pivot almost the business overnight and sustain revenue. If we hadn't had that data, there's no way on earth I could have done that from spreadsheets. So we were just super fortunate at the time, and it was one of the things that carried them through for the next few years. I cannot emphasize the data bit enough of capturing that stuff, because once you've got that, it's super easy then to reorg. But without it, you're kind of sailing blind.
Amazing success story there, Martin. Congrats. Any other questions at all for the panel? No? Well, big round of applause then, please, for Martin, Fadini and Joe. Thanks, guys.